We're here at ScaleX 2025 or 22.
22X.
22X. So I'm Ben Savage, the CEO of Veritas Automata, and with me I have Taylor and Faisal. So Taylor, if you want to do a quick intro.
Yeah, howdy everybody. My name is Taylor Dolezal. I am head of product engineering, or HOPE for short. That's what I'm selling today. And CEO, chief of staff at Merly. And we work on AI code quality tools.
All right, Faisal here, third year at Scale. I'm a principal technical consultant with Ahead consulting firm. And yeah, excited to be here and a great event. But more importantly, I can't say enough that I appreciate you both personally and also because of Cloud Native Los Angeles background. You both have been through your organization, Ben, and you have been phenomenal for us and the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and the Los Angeles chapter. So thank you.
We appreciate that, and it's always been fun to work with you guys. And I'm excited to talk tech and talk about what we can get into.
Yeah.
Are you going to change your name to Obi, by the way? Obi-Wan, by the way. If you're everyone's last hope.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay.
We have more than one product, so there won't be a last. Yeah.
Cool. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing from a developer quality and using AI, because we talk a lot about AI and Gen AI and conventional machine learning, and I'm excited to see how it's going to help developers.
Yeah, so honestly, the approach that Merly takes when looking at AI, it's the CEO, his name is Justin Gottschalk. We call him Goju because to his point, there's a lot of Justins in the world, so the nickname is essential.
Yep.
He has a huge history when it comes to working at Intel, running a lab, and working in academia as well, teaching at MIT, UPenn, Stanford University. And so he's been in this space for a long time and has gotten to see a lot of use cases where you can be deterministic in your approach. So rather than stochastic, you can actually have this determinism, which is what you want, right?
Yeah.
A life coach might tell you 1 and 1 is 3, which is good. And that's a good soft science way to prove things out. But when you're dealing with medical spaces or education, construction, you're going to want 1 and 1 to be 2. So that's what we take a look at specifically for code. We can actually reason about it and then point out places where you have a crash bug, you got some performance issues, you might even have some readability problems too. And then teach people why that's wrong, because we can reason about it, show them a couple different options. If you're a bank, you're going to care more about security than performance, right? You want the check to clear and make sure that your budget's all aligned. But if you're a high trading organization, you might want that performance. So that kind of awareness about the code is really helpful.
Very, very
and
cool.
Really fun to share with people.
Well, and like you were talking about the performance piece and the finance piece. I remember there was a company we were working with years ago, and they didn't understand CAP theorem and the idea about eventually consistent. And they were using Mongo in a system that processed credit card transactions, which worked well when it worked, except for the fact when a card got declined, but they'd already said yes because of their eventual consistency, and they didn't get the update through. Yeah, that was one where like a good tool would look at and go, developer, are you really sure?
Yeah. Or try to get those payments in really quick because you only have a limited amount of time.
But I like what you were talking about the determinism piece, because I think people don't understand that about some of the newest Gen AI tools, which can be really, really cool, but they can do some things you don't expect.
And that's the thing too, is that my eyes have been open to this entirety of this machine programming field. And I'm lucky because I get to work with the CEO who built out the space and worked with a lot of deep academia people on this front. And that's what I'm still fine-tuning my approach as well, as far as better understanding where these language-only models have their place. Really great for soft science summaries, like that's where they're great at. But when it comes down to code, there's a little bit of an overreach, I feel, going on, where it's trying to apply it to everything. It's like your friend that found that favorite new spice or sauce and puts it on everything. It's like, that's too much.
Well, it's the Gartner hype cycle, right? It's at the I'm not even sure it's at the peak, unfortunately. I think it's close to the peak, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then we'll get to the trough of disillusionment, and then eventually people will find real solutions. That's what I'm hoping.
It's fingers crossed, yeah.
So Faisal, I know you've done some work with AI and LLMs as well, and I wanted to get your take on how you're seeing it.
Yeah, so I guess I'm seeing it a bit more downstream like you are at Veritas Automata, where you are charging into that space and making that developer productivity really come out in the open. For me, it is to leverage your good work, and Merly is an example, as well as another project that I think you are aware of, Cubia, infrastructure as code, and kind of leveraging the AI there to really increase the developer productivity. So when I'm talking to the customers, it's usually in the context of application modernization, infrastructure migration to a cloud native, perhaps in the second cycle, and some of these conversations around LLM, and it's significant because essentially what you're doing is you're leveraging these LLMs to integrate and help the customer. Oftentimes there is a challenge in terms of resource upskilling, and that's where Merly comes in or Cubia comes in. We're like, okay, I have a buddy, right? And its job is really focused to help me look at my code, right? And say, dear God, do you see what this is gonna do when the user does this, right? Or from an infrastructure as code, like, oh, I see what you're trying to do. You're building this infrastructure. I suggest you do it this way so you can actually evolve this code base. So our job is to take the work at, say, Merly or Cubia from an AI perspective and say, we've built this modern infrastructure for you. We've modernized your apps. The journey for your resources, right, your personas is evolving. Here's how you can leverage it and help meet some of that gap.
Well, and I've seen, I think, to that point too, and your point about summarization kind of reminds me of this, Taylor. I've seen some tools for particularly cloud native infrastructure can get so complicated. So how do you help the teams rapidly debug when there is a problem, right? Because you've got logs from 4 or 5 systems or more, depending on what it is. And those logs are not always optimized for human readability. And I've seen some cool tools that people are starting to work on now where they take that and use the LLM to go say, hey, what could this problem be or where could it be? So you're tracing through. And that's kind of exciting. That's kind of fit with what you're talking about with some of the infrastructure pieces too, is how do you make that easier to go work, maintain?
Absolutely. And even more upstream, right? I mean, in terms of, and let's take platform engineering as an example. You're building IDPs. You might be minimizing the complexity by leveraging an IDP, but the complexity is still there under the hood. So then it's like, okay, you address some of the early on challenges with, developer productivity, right? But what if I need a bit more? What if I want you to help me put together that YAML that I can use to stitch another component into the IDP, right? And so I think we're still in the early stages. You kind of called it out that we're not right there. And I think as a byproduct of that conversation, there's a lot from a developer, from platform engineering perspective that is evolving. And so certain things like you can generate a config to deploy something, but then there are other things that are still kind of in the works.
So here's a question. This is a bit of a ringer because we didn't talk about this in any of our email to kind of prep for this.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited about some of these tools. But what does this mean for developers and like the ability to troubleshoot? Because if we make it too easy and they don't actually know how it works, that's one of the things that has woken me up a couple of times at night is we're thinking about how do we apply these super, super cool tools to make the team faster.
And not only that, what I would say is there used to be a time, maybe about a year ago, where when people would talk about, Copilot or ChatGPT or even AWS Q for developer, they're like, okay, this is great, but is my team ready? Because let's say you get a suggestion from ChatGPT to improve your code. Now, are you ready to have this conversation in your code review? Do you have the talent, right, to say, this is what ChatGPT produced or Merly suggested, but do I have the skill set to kind of cross-check, verify? In aviation, I'm a pilot. In flying world, you kind of do your checklist, but then you have to verify, right? So that verification in terms of leveraging Merly, QBI, or other AI tools is still very significant. So in other words, if people say, is your job going away? It's not going away. You just have to leverage and understand what is the capability of this AI tool, this LLM model, what is it trying to do for me, and where to find gaps, right?
And I think that's the biggest piece when real learning is hard, right?
Yeah.
And I think you hit on something really close to my heart is the fact that we want what's fast and easy. I've worked in many places where we're trying to ship these things as fast as possible, right? And have this level of accuracy. And as a pilot, if I can imagine that if part of the process and you're starting to make your descent and get onto the runway, when you're flipping switches and working in with all of your controls, you don't want to flip a switch, roll a 20-sided die, and hope that the landing gear comes out, right? So those fundamentals of that's where some of the
or if the landing gear does not come down, is the pilot in command ready to take over the system and say, you know what, I'm going to make this decision. We're going around. We're not landing without gears down, right?
Exactly.
Well, and I think that's what excites me about these tools, but I think it does bring in some new things. Like, so we bring this tool in and we allow our team to go that much faster. But how do we build either new processes or new training within our organizations to make sure that they can understand the impact of when the computer says RMF? Do you really mean that or not? And remember, some of this data, your data is good because you guys are training it on specifically code. But remember, a lot of these tools are trained on Reddit and other things where
it's really twofold. It's one thing is the education, and well, it's actually three. One is the education and trying to get people to understand, because you have tools like Cursor and ChatGPT, OpenAI, Anthropic, all of these tools, but when it comes down to kind of like both of you had said, when you're looking at that pull request, it's on that maintainer, that person to say, yep, this is good code. Those are the tools that really help people understand. That's a really good place, in my humble opinion, to focus on. And then the team understanding why that's a good idea. That's the second part. The third part being more so is your team ready? And kind of to your point, like, you can implement AI and everything, but is your team in a place where you've set up the right policy, procedures, and understanding of how to apply it, right? If we give everybody this for lunch and they're not ready for, this cuisine, then I wasn't prepared. I don't know how do I do this?
So talking about that, I just want to ask you something. Something caught my eye. I was looking at your LinkedIn profile before this conversation. You talk about solving interesting problems, quote unquote. What is an interesting problem to you and your customers? And like, how do you pull in, these AI-based solutions into those conversations?
So I think a good way to summarize that they're the problems that there's not an out-of-the-box or an off-the-shelf solution. So I spent a lot of my time in industrial segments and now life science, where there's a lot of complex processes that are sometimes clearly defined, but they're not easily automatable because they go through 5 or 10 different things. Or like, we were talking with a company where we were looking at something that was molded plastic with embossed characters on it. It's easy for a human to read. But now you're taking something that's really hard for most machine learning algorithms to look at. So how can we build something, whether it's a fixture or an algorithm, or leverage the new visual multimodal models to say, how do we get that data so that we can speed up that decision making for the person, and someone isn't spending 5 minutes flipping something going, I mean, we've all been there, right? You've seen that.
How do you hold this?
And then a lot of times there's complex mechanical movement in what we're doing too. So we're controlling motion, we're controlling other things, whether it's we're doing the robotics or working with a partner to go do that. And so that combination lets us take someone out of a fairly boring task, put automation behind it, so now the person is looking at it and assessing. It's kind of like what you were talking about for making sure the person's actually reviewing the pull request, right? We're trying to make people do what they're good at and let the computer do the really repetitive stuff. And it's hard to come up with a quick one-line thing. But it's kind of one of those problems where you know it when you see it, because most people go, I can't do that.
I think context is important too, to answer both your questions as well. Like a toy app or something where I'm like, let me just understand this topic again. That's where I'll love to go to a lot of these tools that exist that are massively scaled right now. Is like, give me an example of this. I'm learning the Zig programming language. How do you do a bubble sort? Like, help show me, give me some things that I can start building on top of. I find really helpful.
So I have a follow-up question on that one. So you obviously are in a space where you're kind of leading the charge. You're helping the customers. I remember about 2 years ago when I was at nClouds, they're an AWS managed service provider, and I was building this Gen AI practice. Framework was important, framework to engage with customers, because you didn't want to go out and say a shiny object, AI, a Gen AI, right? And say, hey, we're going to do this for you. Question number one was, thank you for the opportunity, but let's talk about do you have a real case? Internal, external? Is it whimsical? Does it need to be solved? So how do you, in your conversations, kind of, balance the need to do the right thing, or sometimes say, this is just not going to work, and this is not the right solution?
Yeah, so I think I have my team look at it in a couple of ways. The first is really, we talk with them to understand the problem and say, do you have data or a way to get data that you can use to automate that solve the problem?
Sure.
Because that will drive, are you using conventional machine learning or using Gen AI, or if it's actually solvable.
Sure.
Right, and there's some things where people go, well, I want magic to happen. And we've all been there where you tell the customer, if you do follow steps A, B, and C, we can automate it. But they go, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to collect the data, or I don't want to use something.
Sure.
Well, tough luck. We can't solve your problem. Magic doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first piece. And that we kind of do through a boot camp or a discovery process. Say, okay, what's your data? What are the problems? And then map out how we could come up to a set of MVPs to prove and validate what they want to do. Because the other thing is, how do you look at this from a cost perspective? Because it's really easy to say, yeah, I'm going to use Gen AI. And then you go, oh, it costs this much for each query and each token. And
soon before you know it. So I think what you're alluding to is, and it's much easier for you, Taylor, because you know where your data is going to come from, right? You're integrating with GitHub or something else.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is, hey, it's not just that, it's data hygiene, data architecture. Okay, once you plug it in, what is the cost of that data, that bandwidth, right?
Yeah.
But you don't have to worry much about it at Merley on these things, or do you?
You should see some of the commits. Yeah, no. I think you're 100% right on that front. And that's something that was really important and evident when I was at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, was a lot of people wanted to race to AI, but they didn't have their room clean in the right respect, right? It's like, what's your inventory look like of your data? How sensitive is this? What do you want to hand off between all these different thresholds?
The sensitivity, the security piece is a good thing. A lot of people still aren't talking about, because you probably don't want all your finance data in your company's Gen AI model where anyone can go query it.
As long as it's not being used to retrain, right? Somebody else's model, right?
Or just how do the users access it? That's the thing.
Right.
It's thinking about who you give your data to downstream. Always, why would you ever want to do that? That's something that we've built into Merley too. You can host on-prem. You don't need GPUs, and so you could save a little bit on your cloud bill, running our stuff too. But I think to answer your question in kind of how do you sell this, what are the frameworks that you use to think about things? And I think generally, not throwing away an answer, giving a non-answer, but it's really about time and money.
Yeah.
Even higher than that, the higher concern is usefulness. And so, are you saving me time? Are you saving me money? Are you making me more useful at my job?
Yep.
We saw this happen with Google and several other products too, right? Where people don't say, I Googled this, some do, but I found this. And so kind of that, trying to get into the customer's head of like, you helped make them a superhero. You gave them a superpower.
Yeah.
Now they're far more effective and they can have more time to spend with their families, check out their hobbies, do these additional things. You've helped them compact more usefulness into a day. And that's a beautiful feeling to give someone.
But that's because you're using a model that is specific to do a certain things, and you can control what damage it may or may not do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sending out an output based on what you got from Merley, which causes an issue downstream, is just not a really good business outcome, right? For you or the customer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to your point to this, where there's not a happy path that's clearly defined.
Yeah.
It's more that too, which makes it a lot more difficult to make them happy and say like, I've constructed this thing that saves you time, money, is useful, gives you the superpowers. There's a lot more thought that goes into, like you said, where's the data, what's getting put into the system, and what's the outcome look like.
So I do want to come back to one thing you said, because you said you're able to do it without GPU and do it with CPU. So how did you do that? Because I spent a lot of time looking at like small LLMs and like 1.3B and like some of those, like, are those the right fit for some of the applications? So I'm curious how your guys' approach is, if you can talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. At a high level, it's we can run on commodity hardware. So that's the fun thing. Just before this, I was on my computer taking a look with my iPad as the screen. Was able to run inference on the entire lifetime, 50 points of inference across a C to Rust repository, and I can do it in a minute and a half. No other tool does that. So really cool performance.
Yeah.
The reason though is because similar to when you think about I'm sure many of, I'll ask you, have you ever had to run a report at an organization and you see the CPU go, and it takes X time. And then you move it to a machine that's 2X stronger and it's even faster. That's effectively what's going on with GPUs. And it's thinking about the constructed material. Are you basing things on a solid foundation? And that's the reason why we're able to do this, is we said, oh, hold up. The way that, again, the GPU approach, neural nets, all of these aren't wrong. It's just, are we solving the right problem with these? And so that's the core of it. We said, okay, we don't want to use the same construction materials, and we need to rethink how we're using all of these. That's why in our algorithms, we've been able to build everything out for a CPU and be more responsible when it comes to the environment, your cloud bill, all of these other concerns too. So just kind of rethinking that method is essentially our secret on that front.
Very cool. So I'm going to throw another ringer question that we didn't prep. Have you guys played with any of the new deep research tools, whether that is with Perplexity or Gemini or GPT? What did you guys take on those? Because you mentioned Google, and that's what got me thinking that those bring a whole new world into search and into like marketing, sales, or ads, and all that stuff.
There's something. I can't remember who it was. I wish I did. I'll have to go look it up after this. But it was someone that framed this problem of looking at things through time. We love to do this at Merlin and look at the lifetime of things. And when you roll back and you think of the 1950s and 60s, to learn something, you had to go to the library, check out an encyclopedia. Maybe you could bring it home, maybe you couldn't. There's a lot of effort to find and learn. Then fast forward many years, we get to this point where we have the internet, all these other things. We finally get to Google. Now we can have this large corpus of information available to us, but it still doesn't necessarily get us this answer yet. Now with AI, tools like Perplexity, which I love to use and stitch together, like I want to use this model and that and this chain of thought. I get to assemble how I find information exactly the way I want. And I can get down to the line or a very tailored answer on what's going on for what I'm looking for. And again, that saves me a ton of time rather than having to do this deep research thing. I've loved what they've been able to do because I'm a very curious person. And so getting this large understanding of the world around me without having to put in all that time to research is a huge time saver. I'm a big fan.
Have you played with any of those tools, Phil?
Not much, but based on my limited understanding and playing with it, learning has become much easier. And what I mean by that is, and I think you kind of alluded to that, rather than Google searching and going through X, Y, and Z resource, like if you put in a search criteria with good prompting, right, and say, hey, I want to learn about the Citation Ultrajet landing system or electrical system. I kid you not, it'll teach you like an elementary school kid. And I think that's what you're kind of alluding to as well. And I think we're going to see more and more of these where organizations will start to build, their product portfolio based on these very specific, dedicated LLMs that are going to help individuals overcome some of the challenges with learning.
I think it is. That's one of the things it's like I was talking about how to make sure developers know how to go troubleshoot code and really understand how code works and technology works. But I think learning is going to be another thing. Maybe this shows that I've just read too much sci-fi, but one of the things that's like a key in all those books when they have, whether they're augments or AI or other things, there's a point in time where they disable that for the students so that they have to learn how to learn without the augment. So that way, if something does happen, and you also know to sometimes question your data source. That's what, because I remember still, most of when I was in school, you were still looking up through an encyclopedia or you went through the library, you had to learn go through and do all that and write your research down and learn how to judge a source. Because today people seem to think if it's in a book, it means it's true. No, it means there's someone with an opinion who wrote a book. So how do you assess the credibility of that source? It's the same thing online. But like learning those things, I think people are going to have to come back to at some point. You can't just use the tool, because if you use the tool without knowing those pieces and just have the query give you the answer, you don't really learn it and internalize it. So like you're using it to really learn how that landing system works. But a lot of people just go, okay, here's the answer and put it on the test and move on.
And I think the biggest thing is human interaction is not going away anytime soon. I'm asking it, hey, look, what happens when I attach an external power source, a GPU unit to the jet? It says, it will provide power right away. And I'm thinking, no, it's not going to do that. You really need, So,
Yeah.
so you need to have that human presence in the mix. Totally agree.
I think it's part of what's going to make it interesting as we get over this, the hype cycle and into the next levels. What does that really mean? And it's back to sci-fi. Right? I kind of find it fascinating to see you can look at what people have read, which books, and go, okay, these guys read Diamond Age, these guys read Snow Crash, and they're building a whole business model around that book to make it happen. Or the original cell phone, right? The guy had seen Star Trek, he thought that the communicator would be so cool, and he made it happen. And then we had the Star Trek.
It's transparent aluminum. Is that going to come out anytime soon? Well, I
maybe
guess
we might need it. We might need it.
That's another huge point of interest as far as interest for taking a look at that research and seeing people's ability to critically think. I talked a little bit about this earlier. Like hard learning is the kind of learning you want, even though it's really uncomfortable. You remember it, but that is the right way to learn. And we've seen papers come out of some research groups, with people from Microsoft and others, where that concern is raised heavily.
Yeah.
We're seeing this great thing happen in open source where it used to take 2 months to contribute code. Now it's 2 weeks. Objectively, that's good momentum, but there's a lot more code churn, so it's not the best code.
Yeah.
And we've seen this happen too with Google, with GPS and these other things too. People's reliance and ability to critically think, because we're not using those muscles or parts of our brain anymore. So it makes sense, but there is the real world question of, is that the worst thing? If you're reliant on a GPS, most times, no, in my opinion. But when you're with critical thinking and code, I would say that's still probably a good muscle to hold on to. So again, it's all context.
It's like playing, keeping your brain functioning at an older age.
Yeah.
Being busy with playing chess or doing other exercises, right? You take that away and you simply take whatever the system gives you. There's a lot of room for error. Yeah.
So I think on that, it's probably a good ending point. So any closing thoughts, Faisal?
Yeah, I think for me personally, as being cloud native attached, CNCF ambassador and platform engineering ambassador, I think that there's a lot of value coming up with AI in terms of building and evolving the IDPs of the future. So there's definitely a lot of excitement, and I'm not drinking from the Kool-Aid. So that's just my final thought on that.
I agree. I think it's important to have conversations like this, and there's not 2 but 3 ways to frame things. And there's, I strongly believe that, I strongly disbelieve that, and I don't know.
Yep.
And that's the thing where I think it's beautiful, because that shows true wisdom. Is that's a chance to explore, that's a chance to learn, that's a chance for us to dig in and have more conversations
And
like
understand
this.
understand the limitations and call it out and be ready to address those, right?
To your point, it's that human kind of interaction. We need that.
Yeah,
we need that.
Yeah.
Well, and I like that point about I don't know, because there's so many times where people are afraid to say they don't know the answer.
It's okay.
And because they're afraid to be wrong or whatever. But it's like, the reality is, maybe no one knows the answer because nobody's done it before.
Yeah.
So what happens?
How can you have an opinion on something you don't know? That's irresponsible.
Cool. Well, I've appreciated this. This has been fun. We will have to probably find at least one more time to do this.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure we'll think of something super creative. So I appreciate it, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you.